Welcome.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cheryl Grace, Senior Vice President of U.S. Strategic Community Alliances and Consumer Engagement for Nielsen, the company that measures what you watch and buy. And I am also a proud supporter of MOBE since its inception in 1991. So I'll be sitting in tonight for the founder, Yvette Moyo, this evening, and I'm going to welcome you to our 32nd MOBE Monday episode, 32 episodes so far this year. And the MOBE Mondays was actually born out of the pandemic. MOBE quickly pivoted from a physical symposium to a weekly virtual advanced marketing series. Now, for those of you who are new and joining us for the very first time, MOBE is an acronym, and it stands for Marketing Opportunities in Business and Entertainment. And it's where the best in marketing and technology, sports and entertainment converge. MOBE connects to all things Black and urban. The MOBE conferences facilitated strategic alliances and professional development and resulted in deals between small businesses and corporations that MOBE has been able to attract to more than $200 million. And you can read about the great work that MOBE does and all of the successful leaders who've engaged with MOBE over the years on their website, mobesymposium.com. And by the way, MOBE and this MOBE Monday series is brought to you by Real Men Charities, Inc. And we don't want you to leave the site now, but after the show, I want you to go to realmencharitiesinc.org/donate and give, if you will. Now, MOBE Mondays features various subjects that affect Black businesses and consumers. And during this election season, MOBE presented a show on voter registration in September. And then in October, they did a show about getting voters to the polls. So it was very important that on this election eve, y'all know tomorrow is election day. Tomorrow is election day. You have to be invisible not to know that at this point. But MOBE felt it was really very important to address the very important subject of mental health and how to develop a plan to deal with our emotions come tomorrow. This year has been incredibly stressful. The COVID-19 pandemic shut down the world, and a lot of people immediately lost income, and many actually lost loved ones as well. Protesters marched around the world for racial justice, and corporations addressed the hard issues of diversity and inclusion. And we learned a lot about people who we thought were our allies. And as the months dragged on, the feelings of isolation and financial security began to really surface. The world as we knew it has changed drastically, and some people were and still are on edge. So to that end, we brought together 3 professionals tonight who can help us identify these feelings of anxiety, anger, and more. And no matter what the election results are tomorrow, it's important that we have guidance on how we're going to move forward. And so we've got these 3 experts who are going to help us deal with these emotions, and let's meet them now. I'm going to start with the ever wonderful DC Marshall. DC Marshall is CEO of Diverse and Engage, and she's providing services to major corporations to assist with strategy programs and initiatives to support inclusion, workplace culture, learning, and developmental goals. She is a survivor of the 9/11 World Trade Center attacks, and she has a successful consulting practice on career transitions and reinvention. She is an influential leader who has received numerous awards for her service, and she's also a good friend of mine. So thank you for joining us, Dee.
Thank you.
We also have Dr. DeForest B. Soares Jr., who is the president of the Corporate Community Connections, Inc., and the senior pastor of First Baptist Church of Lincoln Gardens in Somerset, New Jersey. He's a former New Jersey Secretary of State and the author of the books, Say Yes to No Debt, 12 Steps to Financial Freedom, Meditations for Financial Freedom, Volumes 1 and 2, and Say Yes When Life Says No. He is the creator of D Free, a financial freedom movement in use by thousands of churches and organizations across the country. Welcome, Dr. Soares. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Obari Cartman. He is the current president of the Chicago Association of Black Psychologists and a curator of a directory of Black mental health providers. That's really very important. I hope you're going to share with our audience how we can get a copy of that directory. He is also the program director for Real Men Charities, where he facilitates weekly men's wellness and African drumming circles. And he's also the associate editor of the South Side Drive magazine, Chicago's Guide to the Good Life. He recently created a male rites of passage curriculum called Manifest that is being implemented in juvenile detention centers, schools, and in private community settings in representation of the nonprofit. He is a well-respected community psychologist and trauma therapist. Welcome, Dr. Cartman.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm going to turn things over now to Dee to lead off the conversation with the other two individual and special guests, and I'm going to see you guys at the end of the show. Dee?
All right. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you so much. Glad to be here this evening, everybody. So we're talking about, are we talking about anything other than the election? Not really, but tonight we're going to talk about anxiety to achievement, reframing the 2020 election results for maximum motivation. That's what we're talking about tonight, anxiety to achievement. Some of us, some of you who may be watching, you are overwhelmed, and I don't know about you, but I certainly have been overwhelmed, heart palpitations. So this is really real. Social change, addressing issues of social injustice, Black Lives Matter movement, COVID-19, social distancing, a heated political climate, having all come together to create a tsunami of stress, spiritual and mental health challenges. A lot of people are challenged right now mentally, just thinking about it all. And so, yes, we are in the midst of a never-ending news cycle, online misinformation, a lack of leadership in this country, unlike anything that we've ever seen before, and all leading up to an election unlike any in modern history. So tonight we're going to talk about all of this and processing it and how it makes us feel. And what do we do on the other side of this? So what do we do in 48 hours? In fact, in 28 hours, what do we do and how do we move through this? So we're talking about anxiety to achievement. So I want to start with Dr. Soares. I'm not necessarily the leader in this conversation, but I am a few in the conversation, but I want to start with Dr. Soares. And the reason being is because you put out a video recently, a video sharing your point of view on how Malcolm X would have agreed with Ice Cube. Yep, we're going to start right here. Malcolm X would have agreed with Ice Cube in calling for fundamental shift for the quality of life for the descendants of African slaves. And so let's talk about that, Dr. Soares. And for those of you who may not have seen or heard, of course, Ice Cube's views, just know that Reverend Soares produced an op-ed, a video op-ed, and ruffled some feathers. So Reverend Soares, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, first of all, thanks to MOBE for the leadership. Not just in response to this electoral season, but the leadership that has forged relationships between Black people for the success of Black people. And I want to commend MOBE. And I'm here because this is MOBE. I'm here because MOBE is explicitly Black. I'm here because MOBE has implicit in its founding the idea that if Black people don't do it with and for other Black people, we're probably not going to get whatever it is from other people. Let me also be clear. Well, and thank you, D. Marshall, my old friend, well, not old, but you know, a friend of many years. What I said, And what people need to listen to is that Malcolm X would agree with Ice Cube on the issue of Democrats being as racist as Republicans. That's what I said. I'm not dealing with the Trump's campaign. I'm not dealing with the Platinum Plan. I'm really not even dealing with Ice Cube's so-called plan. What I was dealing with was the fact that if we think our salvation is in either Democratic or Republican politics, or if we think our salvation is in politics at all, then we're suffering from something Dr. Obari really has to treat, and that is a form of insanity, because on the one hand, you can't believe in systemic racism that has been perpetuated by a government for all of these hundreds of years, and then on the other hand, believe that that same government is going to liberate you. So to the extent that Ice Cube made a good point, what I said was that Malcolm X, in his speech where he talked about Dixiecrats being Democrats, and he talked about basically politics being saturated with racism, that is where I said Malcolm would agree with Ice Cube. But of course, we've become so polarized by the larger culture, and we've become so enamored with our own political identities that we come to quick conclusions about each other, and we push the other into one camp or another, depending on our perspective. And it's almost like a default. If you are not in lockstep with one political party, the assumption we make is that you're with the other political party. And I'll just say this, you know, what is so absurd about that, among the many things that are absurd about that, is that at the end of the day, white people use politics for strategy. And we identify politics as a basis for hating each other. We're the only group in America that uses someone else's political party as a justification to hate ourselves.
I don't even know what to say about that. You know what? This is where we need, thank you, Dr. Soares, and thank you for clarifying. I always love to hear your commentary and to hear your perspective and to frame things, and particularly when the masses get really riled up about different things. So thank you for that. Dr. Cartman, listen, a lot of people are angry, and a lot of people were even angry about a lot of things, but I will say even the Ice Cube, you know, speaking out. And so I don't necessarily want to talk about him, but I do want to talk about the anger, because we are really having this conversation about, you know, moving from anxiety, being overwhelmed and anxious, to getting to the other side of this. So what can people do to get past anger and to become more accepting of different points of political views? To Dr. Soares' point, just having different views.
Well, it's a great question, and thank you also, MOBE, for the platform. I think that the moment we're in, the divisiveness, I think it's all hinged on this sense that people want to pick a side along right or wrong lines, and that there's some sense that, like, I must be better than if I'm right, and you're worse than if you're wrong. And that if that is the framework, and the framework is not win or lose, then I think that we're going to stay stuck. And social media has made so many different avenues to agree and disagree that we get stuck there and don't go past to what end. And for me, as in my work as a mental health, you know, in that field, the sense that I hope that we can get through from this moment is to locate where true power is. To Dr. Soares' points, that if we lean on the political systems as the source of power, then we stay in this sense of anxiety because we don't have control over these systems. And
Yeah.
that's the root of the anxiety. This sense
Mhm.
that I can't do nothing about none of this, that I'm just scrapping, I'm just hoping, I'm just wishing. But like fundamentally, we all know that this isn't our country, that these policies, these institutions, these structures aren't in our best interest. And so because we rely on them so much, the anxiety is inherent in that dependency, in that relationship. And if we're going to move beyond the anxiety, it has to mean moving beyond the dependency. It has to mean locating our power in some other thing than whatever system that America gives to us. We're talking politics now. As a mental health worker, I'm very clear that no institution in America could teach me how to heal the traumas of intergenerational harm done to Black people.
Yeah.
The best psychologists, the best trained, licensed, the best theory, the best evidence-based practice that comes from this place can only get me to function within this place. That the power dynamics are embedded in the foundation of these structures. And so until we get beyond like that core of it, we're always going to be circling around each other. And it's going to be there's more and more stuff to agree, disagree on, to fight about, to place blame on, to try to resolve our own guilt about. But none of it is getting us towards like how we win this. How do we can we win this? And that's a whole different set of questions than who's right, who looks better, who's getting credit. Like we're asking the wrong questions. The question is how can we win this is a very different pathway towards the types of conversations and the types of agreements you make, the types of patience you have with one another, the types of values and priorities we place. If I can cancel my grandfather because he said something different, than like that's a value system problem. That's not a moment to moment. Like if I can't understand the rootedness of my family and the rootedness of Blackness in my community, if it takes just a little bit of disagreement for me to never talk to somebody again, then there's always going to be fodder for that. There's always going to be something to spark that division. We can't even let that be the framework by which we engage with each other.
So, and thank you for that, for your just sharing. And so I want to stay here on that original question in terms of how to get past anger. But I really want to talk about, how do we take back our power, both mentally and spiritually? Because again, I think the purpose and the intent for the show was to really help us deal with all of the weight of the world that feels like it's on us now. So Dr. Soares and Dr. Cartman, please chime in. How do we take back our power mentally and spiritually, even before we get to the other side, like right now?
See, I believe power begins with identity. That's number one. And number two, I believe weight is an equal opportunity reality. I think every group at every moment in history has its own weight. And so if I feel that I'm the only one with weight, then by definition, my identity is shaped in the form of a victim. And being a victim then makes me less than those that I perceive as having no weight. But white men have weight. Asian women have weight. That the human experience comes with weight. And the human task is to master the art of knowing who you are and developing ways to not only deal with your own weight, but to form union and fellowship with other people who are sharing that same weight. I mean, that's what could have been weightier than slavery. But slavery at its core did not erase our identity. And so we were able to unite with other slaves to overcome slavery. So I think it's identity. And to Dr. Obari's point, I don't really think I had a sense of identity until I went to Africa.
Wow.
And I don't mean just visited Africa. I'm not talking about going to Africa and on a safari. I'm talking about
On the safari.
I'm talking about living, you know, with Africans in a village whose traditions go back to the 1300s.
Yeah.
And eating food and experiencing culture among a people who are still today doing what they did long before white people ever got there.
Mm-hmm.
It was at that point I realized that all of my identity, I had just scratched the surface in my identity. And so I take my faith identity, my connection, vertical connection to God, then my horizontal connection, which makes me just, you know, I live in America the way I stay in hotels. I'm just passing through because my identity is not in American soil. My real identity is in African soil, and the cultures and the mores and the strength and the ingenuity of the tribe is what frees me up to not really fret over what happens tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. That's good. Dr. Obari, what would you have there?
And I'm gonna move you out of this moderator position too before you get stuck there.
She's stuck.
No, I see it. I see where we go. I got some questions for you too.
Okay.
But I was thinking a little bit when you asked about moving away from anxiety and anger. I think there's something really instructive about our emotions. And I think that for me, the goal is to really to use them to navigate the systems in the world. I don't think you can overcome the anger. As soon as you mention slavery, right? We should be angry about that still. We shouldn't be over that. We should be angry about the things that are happening still. And so to me, the question is, how do you use that constructively? And we have a culture that's so, particularly I do a lot of work with men. Like men have this fickleness about us. We can't sit in our pain for long. And there's so many things that we go to skip past the feeling of it. And so if I feel angry just for a moment and I realize I'm in a system that's cut my legs off and I feel powerless against it, then I don't want to deal with that. And so I'll drink, or I'll use sex, or I'll use violence, or I'll use money, I'll use distractions, I'll scroll all day, I'll use anything other than just being aware of that anger and that anxiety. And as long as we can move through these emotions and we try to circumvent them, then we miss the wisdom that they're trying to teach us. And so if you're not a little anxious in 2020, you're not paying attention. Like, we should be anxious. The question is, how do you work it? Like, how do you massage it? How do you use the momentum of it and direct its energy, almost like transmit it into something more productive? And so, like, if you're in a fight, that fight or flight, that energy that's created turns into strength if you direct it. But if you try to ignore it, or if you try to just deep breathe yourself out of it, if you try to pretend like it's not real, then you can't cultivate it and turn it into an energy that you can direct to something. I think we need to direct our anxiety and our anger to something. We need to take our sadness and make meaning out of it. We need to embrace, run towards the emotions and not away from them, because I think there's wisdom in them. And for us as Black people, I think that the wisdom is using anxiety to be alert. When I'm scared, I sit up in my seat and I'm like, okay, and I'm paying attention now. When I'm relaxed, I don't work with a lot of young men, particularly, so not even just Black men, but young Black men, and their culture of the weed, the smoking, the pills now is all to just make them relax. It's to sedate them. It's to make them calm. My goal as a therapist isn't to make you feel better all the time. I think there's power and freedom on the other side of the discomfort. Sometimes it's not just about you feeling better. It's about us being better, being more powerful, and structuring our emotional understandings and intelligence into power. And for me, that's a difficult process. It's more difficult than avoiding. It's more difficult than just taking baths. And the self-care movement is very much a feel-good movement.
But D. Marshall, you have done that. You see, Doc, what you said much more articulately than I was trying to say. But here's what I'm saying. Every human has a weight. There's no such thing as weightless humanity. And what I'm hearing you say, Doc, is what D. Marshall did. D. Marshall You had the weight and the pain of 9/11.
Right.
And you did not succumb to the weight. You ran towards the weight
Yeah.
and activated through your anxiety. Talk about what you did after 9/11, because that's why you're on this screen today.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Reverend. So 2 things I would say that were profound in terms of coming through that. One was faith, you know that. So because I had faith as my anchor, I believe in God, that helped me to direct my energy, my reaction, and my questions to God. So that was thing number 1, was faith. And then thing number 2 was some really big questions that showed up for me on September 12th, and it helped me to get through. And the questions were, when you get where you're going, where will you be? When you get what you have, or when you get what you want, what will you have? And when you have all that you want, will it be worth Christ dying for? Those were questions that showed up on September 12th, the day after. Those questions helped me to seek meaning and purpose for my life. So those were 2 things that helped me to get through that crisis. It was faith, and it was some really big questions that brought me back to meaning and purpose. So I think in this situation, how did that lesson and those lessons from September 11th, how does that translate in this season? So I'll share how I think, maybe we think about getting through. And I've shared this. I work with executive women, high level, high ranking, high profile women. And I'll share what I shared at the beginning of, the quarantine. And it's something that Dr. Obari mentioned. It was about emotions. And so thing number 1 is locate your emotions. There are 22 emotions. 7 of them are positive, and then the others are negative. And so first just to locate yourself, in other words. So I'm big on following that. I think Dr. Obari, of course, you talked about it a little bit to another level over and above my framing, but locate your emotions is thing number 1. Thing number 2, get perspective. We're coming out of this, right? Wherever you are, we're coming out. I think just having that clarity that wherever we are right now, it's not permanent. So yes, no, I believe that we are going to come out on the other side of whatever it is, whether it's a defining moment or something like September 11th or something like, a diagnosis. I know, Dr. Storrs, you were public about your surviving cancer, and other people who are watching, they've had other defining moments like September 11th, a car crash, you maybe had to bury a child or a parent. So it's a defining moment that forces you to make a definitive decision, which is my number 3. Make a definitive decision about which way you want to go in life from here. So that's my number 3. And my number 4 is to pray. So that's how I am, getting through this season, and how I am advising other people is to really think about, locate yourself, get perspective. You're coming out. We're not going to die. We're not yet. We're going to at some point, but not yet. And decide who you want to be, and decide how you want to come out on the other side. And then I'm always in prayer. So those are some of the things and some of the ways that I really process this.
Yeah.
So what's really unique about this year, beyond, the 9/11 was a really, tremendous tragedy. But we are all collectively going through a collective tragedy this year. Everybody's been impacted by 2020.
Yeah.
And there's a question that came from Facebook about how to be supportive and not separatist. And as you describe those steps, I think about how important it is to not isolate as you go through these processes.
Yeah.
And that the trick bag is the divisiveness takes away the power of that collective wisdom that we have. And so all the ways in which we are separating ourselves makes us more isolated, on top of the isolation that 2020 has already designed itself. And so there's something really essential about the old African values Doc talks about, of the collective power, the village, the community, having that be the people that are alive and the people that have passed, connect the community of our ancestors even. I've been leaning a lot on old stuff in these moments.
Yeah.
It's the America's very, very, very like shiny and brand new, and you want the new stuff. But the old stuff is what gets me through. And having conversations with my elders right now, when you talk to the young people, they frazzled because they haven't been through stuff. You talk to somebody 80, they've been through several pandemics, personal and collective. And then there's a sense of like that get through it you described, D. Like I get that just in conversation in the presence of my elders. Right. And going into cultural traditions that are indigenous, whether Native Americans or African or other indigenous people. Like when I go to the old stuff, listening to old music, chants, and I play drums, like I go to that stuff because it roots me in that. And that's the faith that I have. It's not like I don't have to believe it. I just have to understand we've been here. It's not magic. It's just study. It's science that we've been through, because we the oldest people on the planet. We should be the most competent people on the planet. But because we don't rely on these things, that's when the anxiety creeps up, because it's the lack of identity that you spoke about earlier.
It's the old stuff and the fact of us having survived it that gives confidence that the new stuff won't take us out.
Absolutely.
But I want to get to this question about practical, useful information. You know, Jesus said that greatness comes through service. And at the end of the day, when we see the results of this election, whoever wins, the Black community will have as our prized possession our passion and commitment to serve each other. You know, when COVID-19 hit, the first thing we did at our church was to start an Adopt a Senior program. You know, I didn't want any senior who was quarantined, sheltering in place, living alone, to be lonely or worse, to die in their apartment and nobody knew 2 weeks later. So we signed up 250 people. We assigned them seniors. You call them 2 or 3 times a week. You jot down what you learned, share that information with each other. I mean, immediately people signed up. Now, what I came to discover was that half of the people who signed up to call the seniors were seniors.
Wow.
They signed up to call each other, which was just a marvelous, inspiring, but confusing thing. Here, I'm thinking younger people, you know, to take care of the older people. And people 80 years old talking about my senior that I call. So I just think that culture, that ethic of service and serving each other is foundational, because again, our experience in this country has been that the best of our experiences have emerged out of what we do with and for each other.
Yeah. I wish that I could get just a fraction of the peer pressure we have to vote to do all these other things throughout the year. Everybody feels the pressure right now. There's the guilt for not voting, but it's really just a couple of hours out of your day once every couple of years. We don't have nowhere near that peer pressure to sit with elders, to feed people, to mentor, to tutor, to serve in that way year round. That's when we win. Because right now the model is, let me just go do this thing because it's my civic obligation. But then I go back to work and I go back to watching Netflix and I just go back to the rigmarole of the day to day. If we can get more people with the mindset that we are interdependent, regardless of that system, then we could figure out some of this stuff on our own. And I agree with you. The service is at the root of that, the valuing, the interconnectedness, that manifesting through action. And that action isn't just a clicking a ballot. Like, it's much more of a lifestyle than you can't vote that. You got to live that. But if we depended on the vote, then we say, okay, they'll fix it. They'll solve these problems. There's always this they that's going to create the betterness that we look for, and not us. That's for me. That's what it means to reclaim our power. It's to say,
my anxiety is that I agree with what you said 1,000%. But my anxiety is that if the right crowd hears you say that, one of them is going to say, "Oh, Obari doesn't believe in voting. You see, we can't be analytical and think broadly at the level that we should. Not all of us, but that's why I wanted to be here tonight, because I didn't really come here to talk about the fact that we got to get out the vote and hurry up. Voting is a piece of it, but it's a very small piece. D. Marshall, I don't know if you saw the chat, but there's a question for you. Did you see it?
Let's see.
How do you do the maneuvering as a Black woman to be you and stand strong in your vulnerability, anger, and feel through versus pushing through?
Oh, wow.
That's deep. Yeah.
That is deep. Let's sit back for that.
Right. I want to hear that myself.
Right.
How do I maneuver? I don't know if I have a good response, but I'll share. I think one of the things that I have the freedom to do is to be myself, because I'm a free agent. Unlike my colleagues and some of the clients that I work with, they work for big corporations, and they deal with things like having to mask, they deal with this thing called imposter syndrome, to really package and put on the shelf, who they are. And so for me, I don't have those. I have issues, but I don't have those issues. So right, I have because I have the freedom to be me. I'm bold and unapologetic about who I am. I'm clear about who I am. I love God. And so, I really show up at the intersection of business and faith. I get to do a lot of different things. And while people may judge or have something to say, I'm not subject to that. That's their problem. And so I don't have the weight of some of that there that you're asking. I don't have. If I've got 99 problems, some of this is not my problem. I will say, though, as a Black woman, some of the challenges and maneuvering, and I'll give an example. In this season, because we are amid a global reckoning of racism against Black people in these United States, how I'm managing being a Black woman in business is leading a movement and having conversations where I am to advocate for Black women and the significant disparities. So, for instance, in corporate America, up until May 25th, up until George Floyd was murdered, you couldn't be and talk about being Black in corporate America. You know why? You were diverse, you're multi-cultural, you're a person of color, you are a WBE, D. Marshall, you are an MWBE. You couldn't be Black before May 25th in corporate America and play in that space. So that's a space where I do have issues, and I do have, and still deal with insecurities as a Black woman in business, because you never know if you're making the right decision, if you're doing too much, if you're doing too little. And so those are some of the challenges, that I have had to work through. But how? Speaking up, having a voice, holding the seat, and not just for myself. So along with some of my mastermind buddies, we started an initiative, and the initiative, the BG Collaborative, is really to address corporate America and the significant disparities for Black women, and why it is that Black women entrepreneurs are the largest and fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs and business owners. But when it comes to revenue and employee-owned firms, we don't do as well. And so I think, again, the question or my response in terms of how do I stand strong, is dealing with the issues that I have, but I resolve everything by faith. I line everything up according to what I believe. So I can resolve my identity. So I don't have those kind of issues, because I know who I am. I know whose I am. I know who I am over here. I've got identity. I don't have identity issues. I'm clear on that. I'm clear who has my back. I'm clear when I'm insecure that, I can go a place and have a conversation and pray. And so I hope that answers some of the question. I don't know if I hit it, but those are some of the ways that I maneuver as a Black woman business owner. And I could talk about this stuff all day, but I believe in using your voice, doing what you can with what you have from where you are. And so I'm super passionate about these conversations with corporate America and how it is that we get so little. In terms of opportunity, in terms of compensation, contracts. It's just so much. So stay tuned. I'm working on $1 billion initiative inspired by Reverend Dr. DeForest Buster Stories. I'm working on my own $1 billion initiative, in fact, to get corporations to commit to this $1 billion initiative over 3 years. So you'll hear more about it. So that's what we're working on.
But Obari, listen to the two of you, because you become examples of what Jesus said. You help boys become men.
Mm-hmm.
You help men be better men, and in so doing, you become a great man.
Absolutely.
D. Marshall, you help women become great women, and in so doing, you become a great woman. So it's absolutely true. You know, Obari, Jawanza Kunjufu.
Mm-hmm.
Jawanza's from Chicago.
Yeah.
He was the you when we were young, just focusing on helping Black men. The more we pour into others, the more God uses that process to build us and sustain us.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. When I think about the medicine for anxiety, if you're afraid of a thing, that the work always helps me feel better. If I'm afraid of a speaking engagement, the more I practice, the less anxious I am.
Yes,
and so right now, collectively, we're talking about how do we get over the anxiety of preparing and moving towards being free and powerful as a people. And I think that the day-to-day practice of that is in doing the thing that free people do right now, building those skills. Like if you imagine when we are free at the end of it, what are we doing? What do we look like? What are we wearing? How are we teaching our children? If we can imagine that and then start to implement that right now, then we don't have to wait. We don't have to hope. We don't have to it comes in the moment, and then you enjoy the moment. And in most of my days, I have pockets of Black power and freedom in present day. I'm not hoping for another day for it to come. I create it, and then I give it to my children, and then that's what they know. They know power and their freedom, and in the practice of that, it becomes with food I eat and gardening and breathing. All these daily practices become the medicine for the anxiety.
I love
that. And I think that I don't know if we can teach young people to own that and identify that is the source of what power is. I feel like the anxiety and it all by itself inherent in the practice just dissipates over time.
Yeah.
Here's a question from the panel.
Medicine for anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love that.
There's a question. How do we support our HBCUs when they're constantly adjusting and assimilating through policies to cut our locks, not wear braids, and straighten our hair? I went to HBCU. I went to Hampton, one of the schools that was advocating for cutting locks in the business school, and they called themselves the Harvard of the HBCUs. Like we were playing violins and classical music and all that kind of stuff. And I think that it just represents the African American dilemma. How do you survive and feed children and make money in a culture in a constant sort of structure that is anti who you are. I have that question for y'all, for the business folks, the corporate America folks. They're like, how y'all do this dance? How do you just be amongst and around and play this game and also sort of maintain your own sanity? Like, I don't know that I could spend a lot of time doing diversity and inclusion stuff with white people. I could care less about that work. But I think that's the same game. Like you got to learn to compromise to the extent that you do. And I feel like HBCUs have to struggle with that. How do they stay independent and funded and successful by producing degrees that can go out and to get work, versus being independent and radical and just doing whatever they want, like, and without context, is the African American dilemma to me.
Well, I do think that when we look at our history in America, what we'll see at every stage is diversity in our response to oppression and diversity in our strategies to strive towards freedom. What we had in many instances was respect for that diversity, but there's also been tension. There was tension between W.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. There was tension on the plantation. Claude Anderson will tell us that every slave revolt that was disrupted because a slave turned in the revolters. So we've had this tension, and it's a tension that I don't think it's due to an intellectual deficit or character flaw. It's the tension rooted in the fact that this is an unprecedented experience. We have no textbook. We have no historical moment. We have no paradigm to inform Black people in America how to navigate these particular waters. I mean, you know, if you go to the Bible, when the children of Israel were treated poorly by the Egyptians, the Bible says they left the country. We're still here. And we've navigated these waters as tangled as they are, without any support from anywhere except God and each other. And so I just think, I think Dr. Harvey at Hampton, you know, has had to build out an institutional strategy based on his own experience, his own worldview, his own philosophy. My mentor was Sam Proctor. He was the president of A&T University when the students were boycotting at A&T University. He was best friends with Dr. King, but Dr. Proctor never marched. His role was different than the activist role. A.G. Gaston was a millionaire. A.G. Gaston didn't march. He didn't even believe in marching at first, but he used his vast resources to help finance civil rights activities. So I just think, that the Bill Harveys of the world, the Hamptons, Langston University focused on agriculture out in Oklahoma based on its historical and cultural roots. I think we have to be broad enough to embrace the reality that we are a diverse people that have come through an experience that is historically unprecedented. And the fact that we have any modicum of sanity and success is miraculous.
Mm-hmm. Great response.
Yeah. So another question in the chat is they want us to speak to the isms turned into diversity, equity, and inclusion and corporate statements. You know, I'll start by just sharing, because I've talked about this a lot because this is the work that we do at Diverse and Engage. And, you know, my heart goes out to people of color and Black people in particular, because of the there's significant research on psychological safety being threatened in corporate America, and how it is that corporate America has a lot of work to do when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I will be quite honest, the work that needs to be done in corporate America post George Floyd being murdered is not necessarily diversity and inclusion. I mean, they put it nicely under that bucket, but we're really talking about race relations. We're not talking about people of color in this window at this point in time. We're talking about Black people and the fact that systemic racism exists. I think corporate America woke up on May 25th when George Floyd was murdered, but when Chris Cooper, or Amy Cooper, was our second case study, when she used and weaponized her whiteness against Chris Cooper, a Harvard grad. And so this question about diversity, equity, and inclusion in corporate America, I would just say corporate America has a lot of work to do. I think there are great people within the organization who can do it if and when the C-suite and the CEOs get behind the work But there's a lot to be done with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and specifically race relations. A lot of corporations were, before May 25th, they were reprioritizing gender diversity over diversity. They were diluting and diverting from diversity. They changed the language and lens of diversity. I have clients where a chief diversity officer was not called chief diversity. She was called chief human spectrum and belonging. And so they were celebrating, before May 25th, certain industries were celebrating the death of diversity. And so it was only, if it were not for George Floyd and Amy Cooper, that situation, I don't know that corporate America would be where they are in terms of accepting that systemic racism exists and it lives here in corporate America. Our case study is Amy Cooper and Franklin Templeton. And so, I mean, those are my thoughts. My thoughts are, you know, I am waiting to see what corporate America does 1 year out when we can track and measure, right, the results. Is too soon to tell. So for all of the corporations who made the statements, great. All of the organizations that made donations, yes, but those resources were already in the budget, and some of them, they were probably, and nobody shoot me for this, that was some of the bailout funds. So I'm not impressed per se by, you know, the initial response. I will be impressed and encouraged when I see the results. Now, I'll say this and then I'll move on. A lot of corporations are doing great work, but they have not scratched the surface in terms of what they need to do as it pertains to Black people and the levels of discrimination within corporate America. So anybody want to talk offline about that? Follow NADI, National Association for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, which is the work that I am doing at the intersection of private sector and public sector. So
yeah, I think the people who are raising the right question are the people who are calling for reparations. I have no confidence that it's going to happen, but I think the right issues are being raised, because you can't work people for 246 years without pay and then talk about race relations. It's a conversation I don't think America will ever have. There's a difference between recognizing historic racism and systemic racism. And what I hear corporate America doing is acknowledging historic racism, calling it systemic racism, and they're not really ready to have the I'm not sure I'd be ready. Listen, if I had white people working for my family for 246 years and never paid them, and I'm not sure I would know what to say either. So you know, the bait and switch has been happening since the civil rights movement. Affirmative action, people of color, diversity, all of these things use the data from the Black trauma to create benefits for other people, starting with white women. So, you know, I think systemic love among Black people is the antidote to systemic racism among white people.
I got a question from Facebook for y'all in terms of the election tomorrow. Regardless of who wins, just going to imagine, you know, whoever wins, that there are going to be some things that win won't affect for Black people. What do y'all think are some of those things that won't, whoever's in place, it won't make a dent in the well-being and quality of life for Black people? And then I'll add to the question, what can happen to affect those two issues, or those issues that you think will not be impacted by the results of tomorrow's election?
You answer first, Doctor, because we've been talking too much.
Wait, answer the question I just asked?
Yeah, you start.
Yeah.
Oh, I was so busy asking the question. I wasn't even thinking about, I didn't even register what the question was. I believe that when you say systemic love amongst Black people, when I think about like loving between two people, that, you know, I think the easier phrase, you can't love anybody until you love yourself.
Right.
I think underneath that, before that, there's a, you have to know yourself before you can love yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that there's no president that would shift things enough so that the systems of education, socialization, entertainment, culture, transmission will shift in Black America in a way that will help us know ourselves any better after this election than before. And I think that that is the first work. I think to your point about identity, to the question of relying on things that are old, before love, I think it has to be self-understanding. Know thyself, know us as a community, appreciate the diversity of us. I love your response to the Hampton question. But if you think about my body, my fingers and my toes and my pancreas are very different from each other, but they come together in one body. That has to happen through a process of me understanding that body and knowing it, and not trying to, dominate it or like master it, but just to accept it and understand it. And I think that we have to do that first and foremost amongst ourselves. That's the answer to the divisiveness. How do we be supportive? How do we move as a unit? All of it is studying ourselves as a community and regaining our memory and the complexities of that memory. And I think that from there, lots of solutions to lots of problems will emerge because they're already embedded into our culture, into the body of Africanness, Pan-Africanness, if we want to get broader than America.
I can't figure out why I'm just meeting you tonight. I mean, with this thing.
Because he knows everybody.
Here we are.
Genius like you. I mean, D. Marshall, did you know him before?
No, but yeah, I expect that you know him because you know everybody.
No, I obviously I don't know. I know everybody now that I've met him. My Lord.
Because he's the truth.
I love you, man. I love you.
Okay.
Yeah, he's that guy. He knows everything. Yeah.
Well, you know, my focus is on finance and all of the systems and the and the converging issues that impact our economic deprivation. Those issues will not change tomorrow. It's everything. It's everything from predatory commercial practices to irresponsible personal behavior, and they converge, in some very destructive ways. And so that's not going to change. It didn't change under Obama, and it's certainly not going to change under Biden.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I would say it's not going to change. I love what you said, Dr. Soares, about the systemic love. So it's not going to change our stuff, our cultural issues. So that's the obvious. It's not going to. That's not going to happen tomorrow. But I have two responses. So one, the diversity question is not going to change workplace culture. I don't think, although probably about a month ago, there was an executive order issued, canceling all, bias training and white privilege. It came from y'all's president. And so even it doesn't matter either way it goes tomorrow, your workplace culture is not going to change as a result of the election. But I have another thought. What's not going to change? Not much will change unless we hold our elected officials accountable. So that's a good. So what I know for sure, and what I have now learned is the probability that nothing will change unless we hold elected officials accountable. I don't know any other way to say it. And I share that because, for many years, or I would say for the last few years, I connect and how do I say this? So I've connected with my elected officials and begin to hold them accountable. And what I have learned is you could be educated and you could be successful and you could have your money and your coins stacked for days and know nothing about the political process. And that just was so shocking to me that you could, again, that I could be educated, I could be successful, but not have any frame of reference as to how laws are made and what happens on Capitol Hill, and the fact that we vote people in office who are making decisions about how we live our lives every single day.
Yeah.
And how that's a power play, and how it is that, you know, I've gone to Capitol Hill and I've brought, you know, people with me, and there's nobody there who looks like us.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you know, all the other folks are there, and little Johnny is there. Johnny is there meeting with his representative, and his mom says, "Go on in, Johnny. Johnny, he works for you. She works for you." But our people are not there. And so that's what I know for sure, that nothing will change unless we change the way we engage. I no longer believe that engaging with your elected and appointed officials are for a certain group of people. I used to think that's for politicos and the, you know, people who are political. No, I believe all hands on deck. If you pay your taxes and you live in this country, that you have an opportunity and a responsibility to get involved, support your elected officials, but also hold them accountable, use your voice, share interests that are your interests, your community interests. And so so that's what that would be my ad here. And I will say this is Dr. Sori's fault. It's you know, I'm not political, nor am I a politico, but I did go and work for a pastor many years ago when I left Wall Street, and he happened to be the Secretary of State. And so God set me up. So here I am at Wall Street. Dr. Obari, I left Wall Street for a top 5 financial services firm.
Yeah.
And I go to work. Sure, I went to volunteer. I didn't even want to do that. And I go to work for this pastor, and they, you know, there's 5 nonprofits. It's an enterprise, and he happens to be the Secretary of State. And
Here comes the shade. Here comes the shade, everybody. Here comes the shade. Here comes the shade.
Reverend
I thought we would get through this without the shade, but here comes the shade, doctor. Here comes
Dr. Obari. So he offered me a job, but he's the Secretary of State and the pastor. So how do you understand, for everybody watching, if you've ever, for the one person who might say, now, why would she be doing this, that, and the other? It's because of this guy. He was my pastor, then my boss, my mentor, my strategic advisor. And then sometimes if I did really good, Dr. Obari, he would claim me as his daughter. I have to really do well. But I think my point was going to be, it was a wonderful experience, challenge, and just having great leadership that forced me to no longer be so self-serving that all of my work in my life would be about me, but I would learn about how to serve and to support other people. So I bring it all back to this thing about tomorrow. And what do we do and do differently no matter what happens tomorrow?
Yeah, I think voting tomorrow is critical because it demonstrates both to us and to the country that we are engaged, that we are aware, and that we are not asleep. So I think that's important. I think it's important, as you said, Dee, to remember that whoever wins, they must be held accountable, especially if we care about Black issues. And finally, I think after tomorrow, we have to remember that we are our best solution.
Yeah.
And we can't wait. You know, I told my sons the other day, when I went to Israel for the state in 2000, and when I came back, a war had broken out, and the Jewish leaders in New Jersey called for a meeting to get an update on what was happening in Israel real time. I had just been there. I went to speak to the group. There were 40 Democrats and 40 Republicans. There were 80 Jewish leaders in the room, half Democrat, half Republican, who were there to talk about Israel. And until Black people have 2 or 3 issues that we can unite around, we will be addicted to our favorite white person. And we'll always put them above each other.
That's good. We got 2 questions in the chat we want to wrap up on, so we can get out of here. We're a little bit over time.
Yep, and you know what? But I do want to share this really quickly. This is a shameless plug for anybody who who's never been to Capitol Hill. You've never met with your representative. Follow up with me. So I founded Diversity on the Hill, and every month, on the second Thursday of every month, we visit Capitol Hill for leaders to meet with their representatives. And so I just wanted to say that. I didn't want to leave you out there with, but what do I do? How do I get involved? So
that's nice. That's nice, Marsha.
Diversity on the Hill. Yep.
Very nice. So I'm gonna do these last two questions at the same time. We can all respond to them as quickly as we can. They are around how we all personally deal with our personal anger, and what tips we can give to young people who are struggling to express their rage, that are yielded towards riots and robberies of small businesses in the name of policy change. How do we acknowledge that anger of the moment and direct that into something more palatable and maybe constructive at the end of the day? And then the second question is about advice to seeking help with resources that can be recommended. And I'll start with both of these at the same time. Then we go around and wrap up. If anybody has any final statements, we try to get done by 17 if we can. But in terms of the anger and for young people, I think that it's been really useful for me to guide them towards finding their pockets of power in their individual life and having impacts in small ways that become big ways once they get connected to other young people, and really thinking through strategically what they're doing in a moment that can be leading towards something that extends beyond that moment, that has a ripple effect. But in moments, like if we really submit to moments, all the anxiety and the anger doesn't matter as much. But we hold a lot of it in our minds. If I'm anxious about the future, if I can redirect to the present and just in this room right now, I'm completely safe. The temperature's good. If I'm eating something, if I'm listening to music, or if I'm dancing, if I can really submit to moments, then there's peace always available at my fingertips. I just got to decide to turn the phone off, to just disengage. A lot of times I feel depressed and defeated because I've been scrolling all day, not even on a news channel, but just social media is an energy exchange all by itself. So we got to disconnect. We got to just get back to simple things. And sometimes to the question about seeking help, a lot of people are having a hard time finding therapists right now because most of the therapists I know got waiting lists. Like the need is higher than the field can maintain. So I think that we need to diversify the way we think about seeking help and looking at different sources. It might not be a trained licensed psychologist. It might be a social worker, it might be a counselor, it might be a pastor or minister, it might be an aunt that listens well. We might need to just develop community circles where we come together to grieve, to heal, to read self-help books, and to be our own healing sort of facilitators. That when we give our ways, when we give the power of our healing to the so-called professionals, then we miss the organic like means of healing that's embedded in breath and nutrition and motion and prayer. These things that are free, that we have access to all the time. That we do those things first in lieu. And I'm not saying don't go to therapists, but if you can't find one, you have more healing power inside of you and your family and community than I think we give ourselves credit for. So again, it's all about redirecting power. The whole conversation is about that. How do we find power in ourselves, in the moment, in our culture, in our arts, and do that with urgency? And I think that's what this year has pointed us towards, doing all of this with urgency. And so I'm going to end on that. That's my final statement. If anybody has any other comments about how you deal with anger or recommendations for daily activities, mental health hygiene, or power practices, we can wrap on that, then get out of here. Cheryl can come in now after your last two responses to wrap up. So you have a comment on that?
I say amen to that. That's my comment.
And I say I believe in therapy as a response, but I also believe in preventive practices. I believe in taking good care of your health. I do believe in boundaries. I believe in saying no. Some things are very basic. And this is on top of believing in therapy. I'm a huge proponent of therapy. In fact, I'm going to post a couple of the websites in the comments below. But beyond that, I would just say, for us and our people, I think it's so important to take care of ourselves on the front end, the preventative practices in terms of success routine, quiet time, diet and exercise help with, managing our emotions. And then for the anger, I would really say to put that into some sort of productive own personal movement of what you do with your life in terms of supporting your people. So those are my thoughts. It's been great to be here with you, but therapy is good and therapy works. And when you're not well, just say you're not well. Listen, I've been not well. I have not been well in this season. There have been days where, nope, today is not a good day. I'm just gonna get over here and sit down because this is a lot. And so, but I hope this was helpful for everybody watching. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. I don't know about those of you who are watching, but I walked away with a lot of little nuggets that are going to help me get through not just tomorrow, but through the remaining pandemic and the isolation. But I think one of my favorite takeaways was if you're not a little anxious in 2020, you're asleep. Something wrong with you, right, Dr. Obari? So pretending that it's not real is not helpful for us. I really appreciated that advice. And the power and the freedom is on the other side of your discomfort. So embrace it. There's a saying that I have, embrace the yuck. And I think that that's what some of our panelists were saying, but it was wonderful meeting all of you. I want to announce that MOBE Mondays on November 9th will feature entrepreneurship in all shapes and sizes. So for those of you who have a side hustle, for those of you who want to start a business, you may not be fitting right into your corporate environment or your corporate culture, and you feel that you're ready to be your own boss. Next Monday, the 9th, is the show that you're going to want to tune into. We plan to discuss the different types of entrepreneurship and what's right for you and your personality. And we're going to talk to small business owners and franchisees about their triumphs and challenges. So we're going to have New York Life. We'll share information about their financial program to help entrepreneurs get started. And our list of guests will be Connie Evans from the Association of Enterprise Opportunity. She's going to be the host. Alice A.G. Young. I'm sorry, Alice, I'm butchering your last name. Aji Manbadu of New York Life, Lamar Boyce of New York Life, Aaliyah Baylor, Make My Cake, and Winston Burns from the New Burns Management Group. They're all going to be there. I apologize profusely for butchering those names, but we want you guys to come back next Monday for MOBE Mondays. And thank you to our guests for helping us get through tomorrow. We can get through anything. Get through it, you guys. Wonderful job. Bye-bye.